Hey everyone! So I have a slightly different project this time, because other than the fact that we're working on the Jimny, this really doesn't have anything to do with off-road vehicles or heavy machines and stuff like that, but it is vehicle related. So the thing is, the Jimny is my daily driver and I find myself spending a lot of time in this thing, and while I'm driving around I like to listen to some music. But recently I've been getting a little bit tired of the lack of quality in the original sound system. Now, it's not that it's a terrible system, but it is very limited because you only have two little 4-inch speakers up in the front doors, and that's all there is. So it is a very flat sound, and I would just really like a little more depth and quality to my music while I'm driving around. So we're going to be doing a little bit of an upgrade on this. Now, of course, there's already a ton of videos out there about different kinds of audio installations, but I really haven't seen all that many on the Jimny specifically. So since I'm doing this anyway, I figured I'd take you guys along. Some of you might even find it useful. But I don't really want to be doing it outside because it is starting to rain and it's also pretty cold. And the little Unimog is still taking up all the space in my workshop. So I'm thinking we're going to head out to my workplace where we can borrow some indoor heated space. Alright, so first of all, I'm not looking to do a huge Fast and Furious sound system in this. I just want to do a bit of an upgrade to what I already have. So, as for the head unit, I'm just going to be keeping the stock one in there. It may not be the most fancy thing, but it is the bigger option multimedia unit with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay and all that stuff, so it already does all that I need it to do. So what I do want is to upgrade my speakers up here in the front doors. I want to put in some that are a little bit bigger and also much better, but I want to do it in the same location so that they are hidden away back there so we get a nice, simple and clean installation up here. And I want to be adding a subwoofer to the system. But I want to do that in a way where I'm not using up much of the very limited interior space of the Jimny. So I'm going to be mounting a so-called under-seat subwoofer. So I went ahead and got a couple of units from JBL. So up here for the front I have these Club 522F. These are 5¼ inch speakers, where the original ones in there, they are 4-inch. And as for the subwoofer, I went with this Pro Nano. Now, I've never tried installing one of these units, so I'm a little curious to see how this thing works, and of course also how it sounds. So I should just say that there is a factory option from Suzuki to have an upgraded sound system. And what they will do is mostly the same that I'm doing here by putting some 5¼ inch improved speakers up there in the doors and also adding an under-seat subwoofer. Now the main difference is that they are going to be using Pioneer components. Now, I don't have anything against Pioneer, but I just wanted to try something different, and usually the JBL is really good stuff. But another difference is that they will also add a couple of rear speakers back here, and the car is already prepared for that. To my understanding, the wires is already back here, and I don't know how well the camera is going to pick it up, but you can see that it's already perforated in the plastic there, ready to accept a speaker back in there. Now, you will need a separate mounting bracket to put those in, but yeah, other than that, it should already be prepared for it. But I have heard from some people who have done the rear speaker upgrade, and they're saying that it's really not worth it. Once you have those upgraded speakers in the front and the subwoofer, you don't really hear the speakers back here anyway. It's probably going to make a big difference for the passengers back here, but that's obviously not where I am. So for now, I'm not going to spend the time and money to mount those rear speakers. Anyway, let's go ahead and start with the hopefully easy part and replace these speakers up here in the doors. So first up, got to get this corner off. Should just be able to pull that. There we go. And then we have 3 screws. We have 1 in here and 2 down here. And now it should just be on some plastic clips all around. Ta-da! And just another 3 screws holding in the stock speaker here. There we go. So here we got the stock speaker. Just a very simple, flimsy cardboard speaker, just like most vehicles have. Let's go ahead and see what I got here instead. Manual and some stickers and some foam sealing. Ooh. What a difference that is. Gonna get these little plastic tabs out that the speaker was mounted to. And before I start mounting the new one in here, I have bought some of this sound deadening material that I would really like to get in this door, because there is absolutely nothing in this. And to do that, I really want to get access to this big hole in there. That means I'm gonna have to take this plastic membrane off. Because what this thing does is it prevents the moisture that forms in a closed space like this from attaching to the door panel and run down and onto the inside of the car. Instead, it will attach to this plastic here, and it will gather down here at the bottom, and it will run down into this hole, and it will drain out the bottom of the door instead. So I really want to keep a good seal on this, so I'm gonna try not to mess it up. It is just attached with some sticky glue-like stuff, but it doesn't really dry out, so it should be possible to peel this off. This comes off pretty nicely. And to be fair, the car is not that old. Usually on the older cars, this stuff just falls apart. There's quite a lot of structural supports in here, so I don't really think I can get much onto the outside layer of the door. So it's mostly going to be the back side of this inner panel. I'll just do what I can in here. It'll still be better than nothing. Now there is a correct tool for doing this stuff. It's sort of a little roller that you use to spread it out, but I didn't bring it. Besides, I wouldn't really be able to fit it in here anyway. So with a little bit of luck, I can just stick this back on here. Yeah. Now, let's finally get to mounting these. And immediately we run into a bit of an issue, because the original ones in here, they were just 4-inch speakers, and because I'm going up to a 5 1/4, it obviously won't fit. It's also way too deep in there, so it's hitting the window frame in there. Now, because there was a factory option from Suzuki to upgrade to some 5 1/4-inch speakers, there is also a factory adapter that fits on here and lets you mount a bigger speaker with a 4-bolt mounting. The original one is also just 3 bolts. But unfortunately, when I was looking to buy some stuff for this project, no one seemed to have that particular adapter in stock. So that's where I went and did a little bit of this stuff beforehand. I remembered I had my 3D printer, so I went ahead and made my own adapter rings for this. I got all the measurements I needed, and I just made up a quick design based off the original adapters, with a few changes to make them easier to print, and also to make them better fit the speakers that I picked. And I did end up making 2 different sizes. I made one that is 20 millimeters thick, like the original adapter. Once I made that, I realized it might be a little bit too much, so I also made one that is just 10 millimeters thick. Because on the speakers that I'm using, the magnet is not sticking out all that much, so I should still clear just fine on the backside. However, the tweeter is sticking out the front quite a bit, so I might just want to give that a little more room to avoid hitting my door panel. And the next issue is with my connector in here. When you buy the factory adapters, you would also normally get a little adapter wire that will go into this plug and hook onto some aftermarket speakers. Now, I'm not really going to make a big deal out of this. Chances are no one is ever going to go in here and try to fit the original cardboard speakers back into this. So I'm just going to snap this thing off and just extend these wires a little bit and put some different connectors on here that will hook onto the new speakers. couple of these tabs on here so we have something to screw into instead of those plastic tabs that were in here. Yeah, I think this is going to stick out a little too far. Let's just try the thin one. Yeah, it's not hitting in the back, and it's not sticking out a whole lot. I think this is the way to go. Just gonna get a little bit of foam on the back of these. It's also gonna look more neat when these things almost match the color of the car. But honestly, the only reason they're green is just because I ran out of black filament for my printer. Reason you put all this foam on is just to minimize how much things rattle in here. Alright, so mounting these is probably going to be a little bit fiddly, because I'm going to be using some little M4 bolts or screws. And I'm going to have to get a little nut on the back side here. Alright, this is actually not that bad. Ta-da! The final step, just a little bit more foam around here, just to help direct the sound into the car instead of into the door, and just to help eliminate the last bit of possible vibration between the door panel and this setup here. And finally, I can get my panel back on here. Nice. So that is one side down, so now I just have to go and do all of the exact same stuff over here on the other side. Alright, so that is our front speakers done, nicely tucked away and out of sight. Pretty happy with that. So let's go ahead and mount that subwoofer over there. Alright, let's see what we got in here. A manual, we don't need that. Just kidding, I kind of need to know where the wires go. Oh, this thing is pretty hefty. Pretty cool. We got the multi-pin connector here. Seems to be getting both audio and power through that. And there's a remote switch. This is so you can place this somewhere near the driver's seat and you can sort of adjust the volume of the bass depending on the song as you go along. You don't have to get down to adjust this thing. I don't really know if I'm going to be putting this in, but we'll see. And we have some mounting brackets to hold it down. All right, now I have measured, but let's just go ahead and see if this will even fit. I'm gonna go and take the seat out in a moment, but I just want to test fit it before I do, because there is a few things down here that I have to look out for. So I have that connector over there for the electrical connections up to the seat. That does stay in place, so I just have to be clear of that. And on the other side, I have that plastic cover back there, but that moves back and forth along with the seat. So I have to make sure I have plenty of clearance over there as well. Once we get the seat out, it's also going to be a lot easier to film what I'm doing down here. Oh yeah, this fits nicely in here. There is plenty of room for this. This thing easily fits down here. Now I might just turn it around so that I have the electrical connections up here, just so that when I do carry a passenger, they don't accidentally stomp on and kick on all the electrical connections back there. This is of course just so I can put it back in the same position once I have the seat out of here. So before I start mounting this down, I'm gonna want to run my wires down here, because I'm gonna have to lift up the carpet because I want to run my wires inside the panels here and then run them across underneath the carpet here and have them come out over here where we already have an opening for electrical connections. All right, well, that's really all the room I need, so that's good enough. So let's go and start with the audio cables up from the head unit. Now, I haven't had this off yet, but supposedly you're just supposed to take off this trim down here, and you should have a couple of screws right in here. I think we should just be able to pull this thing out of here. There we go. Cool. That was pretty simple. So this also confirms what I kind of already knew, which is that we do have wires running out to the rear speakers, even though there are no rear speakers. So the ones we need is this purple and pink one here in the middle, and we need this brown one and this oddly colored one. Now, because the wires for the rear speakers are not doing anything anyway, I really don't feel bad about splicing into them up here. But if we wanted to avoid cutting into the wiring harness, we could have found the connectors in the back where they're not connected to anything and just hooked onto them there and pulled that up here. But it would require a little bit more wiring, so I'm just gonna hook into them up here. And of course we are gonna solder it and make it nice and tidy up here. I'm going to run these wires in some of this flex tubing, if we can feed all of these through here. They just fit. Cool. So I haven't actually checked yet, so I'm just kind of hoping we can run the wires up here somehow. So for something like this, where we're in a kind of a weird spot in here with a bunch of very small wires, I like using these solder connectors here. They already have a ring of solder inside them, so you can just stick all your wires in there, then heat this thing up, and that little ring will melt and solder the wires together. And also the rest of this plastic will melt down and create a nice watertight seal around there. So it makes it really nice and handy to make a good connection in a place like this where it would otherwise be a bit annoying to try and get a soldering iron in here and hold all this stuff in place. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do. Alright, so that is all of those spliced in there. That looks alright, so now we can pack this whole thing up and get this unit mounted back in. sure this is every mechanic's favorite working position, up under the dash. Alright, so now I got this nice and secured all up to that corner there. So let's go ahead and bring the power cable in, because I'm going to put that in right up there. And then we can run these two together for the rest of the way. So I'm going to be running the power cable straight off the battery. Now I do want a little fuse out here, and I have my little fancy box here that I made to hold the electronics for all my roof lights up there. And, you know, with a little bit of luck... yeah, now that's a tight fit. It's even holding itself. I'm, of course, going to do something to hold it down, but that is pretty convenient. I did not have that in mind when I designed this box. Of course, I'm also going to be running my positive wire in some of this stuff. Not just to make it look pretty, but also to keep it a little bit more protected. I'm going to finish up this stuff later. I don't want power on it just yet. For once, this came through surprisingly easy. Alright, so now I got these in here. I can go ahead and get all this tied up and make it look nice and clean. And we can run that over here where we need it. But the last thing we're going to need over here is a ground wire. And we're actually running these right next to a ground point right here. So I'm going to hook onto that, and I'm just going to run the ground wire along with these. Now I can run the power and the ground together in a slightly thicker flex. Now I got all my cables tied up, and I'm pretty satisfied with this so far. And I was just about to close this off, but then I got to thinking I do have some of that sound deadening material left. Probably wouldn't hurt to put some here in the bottom, because there is absolutely nothing here. It's just one thin steel plate between you and the road. Alright, I feel like this was worth the extra effort, so now let's go ahead and get all this stuff back together. Alright, so getting to this point where I finally got all my wiring up here, that really was the time-consuming part of this. So now we can go ahead and get this thing mounted. Now it did come with some tabs to hook onto the bottom here so you could screw it down, but I really don't want to be driving several screws down through the floor of my car. In our climate, that is just going to give me rust issues within a couple of weeks. So instead, I'm going to do what I've seen others do when they mount these, and that is to put some of this adhesive Velcro band on the bottom of these. I'm just going to use the carpet itself, going to have it stick onto that, and that should be enough to keep this thing in place. I guess time will tell. I mean, I do go off-road now and then, so it might shake loose. If that happens, I'll come up with some other mounting solution, but for now, I'm just going to try this stuff. This is where my tape comes in handy for lining this up. So this does feel fairly secure. It is just pulling the carpet up with it. Cool. Be interesting to see if it stays in place when we go over some rough stuff, but for now, that's good enough. So now all that's left to do is to get all my wires connected to this little bit of wiring harness that was included. And once we get all this stuff hooked up, we should be able to test this out. Start with my power wires. They are the biggest, so nice to get those out of the way. I don't have a remote turn on the radio that I'm using, so I don't really need this blue one here, so I'm just gonna shorten that up a bit and tuck it away. Now for the part where I do need the manual, because I need to know which one of my audio wires go where on all of these. Right, so that was left side positive, and then this one has to go on that one. That is going to be left side negative. So that was right side positive, and the last one here is going to be right side negative. And these also get a little bit of heat shrink just to secure it all in place and to make it look a little bit more nice. Right, so that is all my wiring finally taken care of. Now I think I'm just going to wrap this in some electrical tape down here, just to make it a little more neutral so I don't have all these brightly colored wires hanging right down here. Right, so finally we can go ahead and connect this thing. There we go. Now we just got to get some power to it. I did finish up my power supply out here. I just ran a positive wire from here up into my fuse box and connected it to my little fuse holder up here. I didn't really film that because it's all down here in the corner, so you really couldn't see what I was doing anyway. But let's go ahead and pop in a 15 amp fuse and see what happens. Well, it didn't blow right away, so that's a pretty good start. And because I don't have that remote turn on connected, that was the blue wire in here, I'm just going to have to push this button. That is the auto turn on. That means this thing is just going to power itself on once it feels some voltage coming through these audio wires. And lastly, I'm going to take all my dials in here and just turn them down to minimum. Cool. Let's fire this thing up and see if it works. Oh, and by the way, depending on what's on the radio just now, I might have to overlay some different music when I'm editing this video because of copyright issues and all that. Right, let's see if this thing works. I did get some light in my LEDs down here. Power is on. So far, so good. All right, so it is definitely working. Now, you weren't able to hear it, but I didn't turn this thing up a whole lot, and already it was able to play loud enough to distort itself. So there's definitely some power in this little thing. Now, the last thing I have to do is to do the final adjustments to make this thing sound right in this car. But before I can do that, I'm gonna have to put the seat back in because these are designed to play against that seat. They need that little enclosed space under the seat to really get the right sound out of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw that back in. I need to hook my airbags and all this stuff back up. Right, so now we can get to adjusting this thing. Now I'm going to be playing some fairly loud music while I do it so I can hear what I'm doing with the different adjustments. So I won't really be able to talk to you and explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So I figured I'd just go over it real quick. Now I'm pretty glad I ended up turning it this way because that makes it much easier to get to all these dials and buttons here. Now, I just gotta say, I am not an audio expert, but I'll just do my best to try and explain what's gonna be going on here. So, first thing we have is the gain. That is basically your volume. That determines how much the amplifier in here is amplifying the audio signal coming up to this. So you want to start with that really low and just turn it up until you get some distortion, and then you turn it back down a little bit. Next up, we have the low pass filter over here. This determines what kind of frequencies you're going to be playing out of this. Now, we only want the low end frequencies, so we don't want to hear singing and stuff like that coming out of this. So if we get some of that, we have to turn this back down a little bit. Then you have your bass boost, and that's just exactly what it says. It's just going to boost the level of bass, so the amount of kick you get out of this. Lastly, we have the phase down here. That pretty much determines whether or not the speaker is pumping upwards or if it's pumping downwards. There's not really a right or wrong way for it to do that. It really just depends on the car that it's installed in. Now, once again, I am going to have to overlay some other music in the edit of this video, because my microphones are not going to be able to pick up the sound differences anyway. And also, if you are watching this on a phone or something else with simple audio, you wouldn't be able to hear it either. So trying to record it with this kind of setup, it's just not going to do it justice anyway. And of course, there is the copyright issue. So unfortunately, you will not be able to hear the heavy, hardcore music that I'm going to be playing in here. Alright guys, so I got this thing pretty much dialed in. Now I might adjust it a little bit more once I've driven around and listened to some different music, but it's pretty much there. Now I opted not to install this little remote bass boost control dial, because honestly I just don't think I'm going to use it. I think once I have this set, I'm probably just going to leave it alone. But I did go as far as to think of a location for this. If I were to install it, I would put it down under here. That would be pretty inconspicuous. Now, let's just change the scenery here so we can finish up this video. And just like that, I have now had the pleasure of driving around this for a little bit, listening to some different types of music, and it really has been a big upgrade to the sound system in this. Now, I'm sure I would not have noticed it as much if I'd only replaced those two little front speakers in the doors, so adding the subwoofer in there, that was definitely worth it. But speaking of that, there is one final thing I want to do, because now that I only Velcroed that box down, I really want to know if it's going to stay in place if I bounce around a little bit. Now this is another one of those things where the camera doesn't really do it justice, because it feels a lot worse in here than what it looks like from the outside. Oh, oh man. So even with all that, this thing stayed exactly where I put it. So I'm thinking as long as I can avoid rolling around on my roof, that will probably stay in place. I'm really happy with that, and actually really happy with my overall setup that I ended up with here. Because everything is just nicely hidden away and original looking, so unless you already knew this stuff was there, you would probably never even notice. So I know this little project is a bit different from what I usually play around with on this channel, but if you did stick around to the end, I hope you at least found it somewhat interesting, or maybe even useful. Let me know if you did. Thank you all for watching along, and we'll see you in the next one.